Good morning, Year 2, and welcome to Maths today. We're going to be exploring unit and non-unit fractions. Don't worry too much about what that means right now. I will explain over the course of this video. I've been really impressed with your fractions learning so far. You have wowed me by recognizing half, and I've put another example of half here. We can see the shape that I've split into two equal parts, and I've coloured one of them in. That's where we get these numbers from. This is how we write half numerically. If we were writing it in words, it would look like this. But we're writing it numerically today. This bottom number, or to use a very fancy word, denominator. Can I hear an ooh for a fancy word, please? This denominator tells us how many pieces there are altogether. There are two equal parts. And this numerator, another ooh please. This numerator tells us how many we've coloured in. So this shows us that there are two parts and one is coloured in. Another way to think of it is 1 out of 2. There are two, we've coloured one in, or it's 1 out of 2, or half. Here are some other examples of half of this 1 out of 2. Look at the circle. It's got 1 out of 2 parts coloured in. This square, similar to the first example, has 1 out of 2 parts coloured in, and this rectangle has been split in half. That's got 1 out of 2 parts coloured in. 1 out of 2, half. Imagine I gave you two spellings. I gave you two words that you had to spell, and you got one of them right. We could say that you got 1 out of 2 right, so you got half of your spellings correct. Here is another example of what we call a unit fraction. Can you think what these would look like? If you've got your maths book there, write down the fraction you think that this shows. Think about the example we just saw, with these ones being 1 out of 2. How many parts are there altogether? That's our bottom number. How many parts are coloured in? That's our top number. Look at these examples and write down the fraction that you think they show. Okay, we can see that we've got 1 part coloured in out of how many are there all together? 1, 2, 3, 4 altogether. So 1 out of 4. Is it the same for all of these examples? Let's have a look. We've got 1 coloured in out of how many altogether? How many parts are there all together? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 out of 4. Now looking at the circle, we've got 1 part coloured in out of how many parts all together? 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, 1 out of 4. And then the last one, the square, we've got 1 part coloured in out of how many parts altogether? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 out of 4. Now, this fraction has two different names. I call this fraction quarter. But some people in our class will call this fraction fourth. And I can see why, because they all have the denominator of 4. It's important that you know both quarter and fourth. 1 out of 4, a quarter. 1 out of 4, fourth. Let's look at some different examples now. Have your pencil and a piece of paper ready? What fraction is shown here? Can you write the unit fraction? Is it the same for all of them? Have a look at these images, have a look at these shapes, and decide what fraction is coloured in. Let's have a look at the first example. Well, we've got one part coloured in, one equal part coloured in. How many parts are there altogether? 3. Excellent. Is it the same for this one? Well, we've got one part coloured in of those equal parts out of 1, 2, 3. 1 out of 3. This one here doesn't look exactly the same, but those parts are the same. They are equal parts. One of them is coloured in. How many triangles are there? 1, 2, 3. 1 out of 3. And then the last example, we can see our circle has been split into 3 equal parts. One part is coloured in, and there are 3 parts altogether. 1 out of 3 has been coloured in all of these shapes. We call this fraction third, or 1/3, or a third. Let's go back to half so we can remind ourselves what these fractions look like. 1 out of 2, half. 1 out of 4, quarter or fourth. 1 out of 3, third. I'm sure you can spot straight away what the unit fraction here should be. If you've got a piece of paper in front of you, write down the fraction that you think it is, and then see if you were right. There's one part coloured in again. How many parts were there altogether? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's one part coloured in. And how many parts were there altogether? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 out of 5. And then this last example, one part coloured in out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 out of 5. What do you think we call this unit fraction? If 1 out of 2 is half, 1 out of 4 is quarter or fourth, 1 out of 3 is third, what do you think 1 out of 5 is called? We call this fraction fifth. Fifth. Quite a tricky one to say. Fifth. Okay, it's your turn now. In your maths book, let me cover these up. In your maths book, you are going to write A, B, C. And then next to A, B, and C, you are going to write the fraction that is shown. So for example, if you were looking at A, and A showed a shape with 5 parts, and 1 part was coloured in, you would write next to A, 1/5, like this. Obviously, your pencil is going to be much nicer than my board pen this morning. Let's move it over, see if I can do it a bit neater. So if A was a shape with 5 equal parts and 1 part coloured in, you would write 1/5. Then you would move on to B. Now if B showed a shape with 3 equal parts and 1 coloured in, you would write 1 out of 3, 1/3. I'm going to show you the shapes now. You might want to pause the video to give yourselves time to write down the fraction that is shown. Don't copy my example because it won't match the shapes I'm about to show you. Here are your first set of unit fractions. In your book, write A and then the fraction. Then write B and then the fraction. Then write C and then the fraction. Pause the video if you need to. I'm going to move on to the next 3 examples. D, E, and F. Once you've finished D, E, and F, I'm going to go back to A, B, and C so we can mark them together. Okay, I'm going back to A, B, and C to write the answers. I'm going to erase this and write the correct unit fraction above. A, easy peasy, we spent a lot of time on this last week. This shows 1 out of 2, which is half. B shows 1 out of 4, which is quarter. And C shows 1 out of 3, which is third. If for B you wrote 1 out of 3, I can see why. Because there's 1 here and 3 here. But that is not how we form these unit fractions. It's not about how many aren't coloured in, it's about how many there were all together. That's why we must make sure that our bottom number tells us how many equal parts there were all together, and our top number how many are coloured in. Watch out for that. I'm going to explain a bit more about that later on. A was half, B was quarter, C was third. Again, if for C you wrote 1 out of 2, because there's 1 here and 2 here, you have made a mistake. You've got to count how many parts there are all together, not just the ones that aren't coloured in. 1 out of 3, 1/3. Okay, D, E, and F answers coming up now. Make sure you're looking at your D, E, and F and your pencil is ready. 1 part coloured in. How many parts were there all together? 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 1 out of 4. Or a quarter, or a fourth. E, 1 part coloured in. How many parts all together? 4. 1 out of 4, a quarter, or a fourth. And F, 1 part coloured in. How many parts all together? 3. 1/3. 1 out of 3, a third. If you were right, give yourself a tick. If you made a mistake, change it so that it matches mine, but make sure you realise where you went wrong so you don't make the same mistake again. Okay, we're moving on to the next examples. G, H, and I. Pause the video, make sure you write G, H, and I. I'm going to show the answers now, so wait until you've finished before you press play. G, there is 1 equal part coloured in, and there were how many parts altogether? Not just the white ones, but all of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This shows 1 out of 5, or 1/5. H is easy peasy, we can spot it straight away. 1 out of 2, it's a half. And I shows 1 part coloured in. How many parts altogether? It's not 3. How many parts all together? 1 out of 4, a quarter. When you send me a photo, I want to see the letter written in your book and the fraction next to it. The letter written in your book and the fraction next to it. The letter written in your book and the fraction next to it. Okay. Have a go at J, K, and L. Pause the video, finish J, K, and L, then press play, and you'll see me write the answers. J, 1 out of 2, half. K, 1 out of 3, third. L, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 out of 5, fifth. Now time for M, N, O. In your book, finish M, N, O, then press play to see the answers. n. Don't just watch me do maths today. Pause it, have a go yourself first. 1 out of 2. Half. N. 1 out of 5. Fifth. And O. 1 out of 3. Third. What do you notice about all of these fractions so far? What's the same about every fraction that we've looked at? They all have one part coloured in. They all have 1 as the numerator, the top number. We're now going to move on to think about ones with more than 1 part coloured in. Look at this first circle. This first circle has 1 part coloured in out of 5 parts altogether. So it's 1/5. If the blue one shows 1/5, what do you think the red one shows? Well, there are still 5 parts altogether. But how many parts are coloured in? It's not 1, it's 2. So the blue one shows 1/5, and the red one shows 2/5. These are called non-unit fractions, where the number on top, the numerator, is not 1 part, it's more. Let's look at some more examples together. The blue one shows 1 out of 3. What does the red one show? The blue one is 1/3. What's the red one? Well, there are still 3 equal parts. 1, 2, 3. How many have been coloured in? It's 2. So the blue one shows 1/3, and the red one shows 2/3. Another example for you to look at. The blue one shows 1 out of 4, or 1/4, or 1/4. The red one still has 4 equal parts, but how many are coloured in this time? The blue one was 1/4, the red one is 2/4. Have a good look at this red shape. What other fraction does it look the same as? If you look closely, you will see that this one we can say has 2 equal parts. So 2/4 is the same as 1/2. We'll look a bit more at that next week. I'm going to do this example, and soon it will be your turn. I'm looking at this first red one. I can see that there are 4 equal parts altogether. 1, 2, 3, 4. And how many parts are coloured in? 3. 3/4. I'm looking at the second example. I can see that there are 4 parts altogether. How many are coloured in? 1, 2, 3. Oh, it's the same fraction. 3/4. 3 out of 4. And now let's look at the last example on this page. I can see that there are 2 parts coloured in. How many parts were there altogether? Altogether, remember, not how many parts are left. How many are there altogether? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 out of 5. 2/5. 3/4, 3/4, 2/5. This is the mistake I was talking about earlier. It's a common mistake, so do watch out. Some people will say it shows 2/3 because you've got 2 and 3. I can see why people would think it's 2/3, but that does not show 2 out of 3. It shows 2 out of 5. because there are 5 parts altogether. Only 2 out of 5 are red. So do watch out for this common mistake. You always need to think, how many parts are there altogether? Your turn. Book ready. We're using some Roman numerals now with I, and I. In your book, write I and try to write the non-unit fraction that is shown here. So what fraction is this? What fraction is this? How many parts are coloured in out of how many parts are there altogether? You might be able to write the numbers, but do you know what you've written? Can you tell me the name of that fraction? Have a go at I. How many equal parts are coloured in? How many parts are there altogether? And then have a go at I. Number 3. How many parts are coloured in? How many parts are there altogether? If you haven't finished, pause the video now because I'm about to reveal the answers. 3 parts coloured in out of 4 parts altogether, 3/4. Next one, 3 parts coloured in out of 5 parts altogether, 3/5. And the last one, 2 parts coloured in out of 3 parts altogether, 2/3. If you made a mistake, change it now and try to spot why you made a mistake. Did you make that common mistake? Maybe for I, you wrote 3 out of 2 because there are 2 parts here. That's that common mistake we just talked about. Remember to count how many altogether to get that bottom number. Okay, 3 more examples, 4, 5 and 6. Write these in your book now. Pause the video, come back when you've finished. Hopefully you've paused the video, you've written these in your book, and you're not just watching Mr Scullion do the maths this morning. Let's try to use our own brains rather than borrowing mine. Okay, number 4, IV, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts altogether, 2 are coloured in, so 2 out of 5, 2/5. V, 2 parts are coloured in out of 4 altogether, 2/4. You might have also spotted that's the same as half. And then number 6, VI, there are 2 parts coloured in out of how many altogether? 1, 2, 3, 2/3. So 2/5, 2/4, 2/3. Ooh, now we're talking. Getting a bit tricky. In your book, write 7, 8 and 9, or VII, and IX, 7, 8 and 9. Have a go yourself, then come back to me for the answers. Number 7. There are 3 parts coloured in out of 4 altogether. 3/4. This is a very important fraction that we will look a lot more at this week. 3/4. Number 8, VII. There are 4 parts coloured in and 5 parts altogether, 4/5. IX, or number 9, there are 3 parts altogether, 3 parts coloured in and 5 parts altogether, 3 out of 5, 3/5. Here's our last one. I would like you to write down the fraction that you think this shows. There might be more than one answer to this question. This is number 10, our last one for maths today. I want you to write down the fraction that you think this shows. There might be more than one answer. Have a good think about it. You can use the skills we've practiced today. How many parts are coloured in? How many parts altogether? or you can look at it as well to see if it looks like something you already recognize. I'm going to write the possible answers that you could have written today. If you started off by counting how many parts altogether and how many parts coloured in, you would find 4 parts coloured in out of 8 altogether. You could have also written, if we're looking at it as equal parts, one out of 2, because the red part and the white part are equal. And as an extra challenge, and something we're not looking at just yet, there is another answer that you could have written. Because if you look at the equal parts like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, we can see that there are 4 equal parts. And how many of these equal parts are coloured in? Well, there's 1 here and 1 here, so that's 2. 2 out of 4, or 2/4. Those are the 3 answers you could have written for number 10 today. If you did, give yourself a well done me. Nice big pat on the back. We're going to look more at fractions this week and next week because there's so much learning to do. Send me a photo of what you did in your book today, and I look forward to seeing all of your home learning. We'll be back again for more fractions tomorrow. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. I cannot wait to see the rest of your activities. Bye now.